Well, Future Soldier is a response to the strategic context we're in, and that was captured, I think, pretty well in the integrated review in 2021. But of course, what we've had since then is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And so, although we characterise Russia as a threat, I think the threat, the speed at which that's accelerated towards us, has taken everyone by surprise. And so what we've done is to adapt at real pace what Future Soldier set out, because we know that we could be required to fight, and certainly we need to be able to deter the threats in Europe this decade. Future Soldier is incredibly exciting. So at its heart, it's the most radical transformation of the British Army that I've experienced in the 40 years that I've been in uniform. This is an incredibly exciting time to be joining the Army, and if you're in the Army now, you join now, the Army you join will look radically different in the course of the next 6 or 7 years. And just to give you a sense of the pace of that, we've now got a really clear sense of our purpose. So the Army's purpose is to fight and win wars on land. That's an important point of clarity for everybody. Secondly, we have thought through and tested to destruction how we're going to fight. So the doctrine about how we fight, both in the near term, so in the sort of 2026 timeframe, and then beyond that into the 2030s, is now set out, and it's set out in the land operating concept. So we know how we're going to fight, and then that drives the capabilities that we need. And the pace of that is extraordinary. So to give you an idea, we will be fielding over 200 armoured fighting vehicles every year for the next 5 years. And that's Challenger 3, that's Ajax, that's Boxer. It'll be a new mobile fires platform, so a replacement for the AS-90. We've got 50 AH-64 Echoes, the attack helicopters being fielded. That's 2 regiments of attack helicopters. This is, by a country mile, the most advanced fighting helicopter, attack helicopter in the world. And then there is a full program of digitization. So we're reducing from a very wide fleet of legacy platforms into a much smaller fleet of incredibly cutting-edge, advanced platforms. And then that will be drawn into structures that are directly relevant, first and foremost, to the role that we have in the Euro-Atlantic area, so it's a core part of NATO. So our offer to NATO will be forward land forces, so up to a brigade, ready to defend and fight alongside our Estonian partners. It'll have a core headquarters with a warfighting division and core enablers under that as NATO's strategic response force. And then this year or next year, we will provide NATO's Allied Response Force, so the most high readiness part of NATO, and that, when it's not doing that, the 1st Division will be part of a global response force. So it's a massive program of change, and I think this is an incredibly exciting time to be part of the Army.
It's interesting that you use the word exciting, because I would like to talk to you about the life of today's soldier and getting them to stay in. General James Swift, who is the last Chief of Defence People, told us on the SitRep podcast that people should be allowed to join and not start at the bottom. Given the issues that you've got with recruitment and retention, is it time for a radical approach to retention, and what would you see that being?
I mean, I think I wouldn't want to overplay the retention challenge. Our retention figures are well within historical norms. So we're not losing people at an unusual rate. We're just refreshing the Army at the natural rate that occurs, where people choose to serve for 4 or 5 years and then go back into society. And of course, they contribute to society doing so. Recruiting is a challenge, but we're not alone in facing that. The other services face the same thing, and many of our Western partners do as well. But that's why I point to the Army's relevance. I mean, you've only got to look at what's going on in Ukraine at the moment to see that land forces have never been more relevant or more important. Why I point to, this is an exciting time to join, and you will be working with the very best, some of the best equipment in the world. So the British Army will be the most modern and most lethal army in Europe by the end of this decade. And the opportunities, the excitement that people often join the services for should be a real pull. I mean, we've got 10,000 soldiers deployed in 66 countries around the world. You know, we are really busy, and we're busy doing very interesting stuff with partners, whether it's in Europe, whether it's in Africa, Middle East, or the Asia Pacific. Now, the program of people transformation, if you like, does look at things like a spectrum of service. So people being able to join and serve for some of their career as a regular, some of their career as a reservist, and then go back out and come back in again. It should be easier to move from the reserves to the regulars than it is at the moment, and we're getting after that. And for some people, you know, direct entry at different levels might well be appropriate. You know, if you've got, for example, deep cyber skills, then you don't need to come in at the bottom. We might be able to use those skills that you have at a higher level. And that program of transformation around people is something that we're working through over the next 2, 3, 4 years. You don't do revolution when it comes to people. You've got to evolve, so it takes a bit of time. But this is an exciting time to be in the army.
What about suggestions of lifting the age cap in terms of when you can serve? Would you agree with that?
So there's no absolute answer to this because, I mean, frankly, serving on operations and warfighting is a game for fit people, and you want a large part of your army to be young, and what you don't want to find yourself into is where some armies around the world where the average age is 45 or 50, because that's just not an effective army. So there is inherent merit in a constant cycle of refreshment of fighting units on the front line. But I'm also conscious that for many we throw away years and years of experience, deep expertise in their particular trade in the army. And so it's also right that we take some of those people, and you think about senior NCOs and warrant officers, where if we can find roles for them that draws on that expertise, then I think that's exactly the right thing we should be doing.
You say that it's an exciting time to be in the military, but when you see the results of the continuous attitude survey, more people are wanting to leave, more people are not satisfied when it comes to life, pay, promotion prospects. What was your reaction when you read the results of that survey? I
always take those surveys very, very seriously, and they feed a lot of the decisions that we take in the Army headquarters and indeed at defence level. And there are many instances where those have prompted us to get after things, whether it's around policy changes or whether it's around investments. I also know, because I've been reading them for 40 years, and of course I've been contributing to those surveys myself, that you're never going to be able to satisfy all of the people all of the time. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, but you just can't. So there's a lot of repeat material and messages that come from this. One of the most consistent themes is around infrastructure, and it's true that there are parts of our estate that are just not fit for purpose. But it's also true that there are parts of our estate that are infinitely better than they were when I joined. Now, doesn't make it right, but when I joined, we were quite often in rooms with 20 people inside them, and now people tend to get their own room. They often get an ensuite facility as well. So the overall trend over the last couple of decades has been for significant investment in infrastructure, and we're seeing more of that around the Defence Estate Optimisation Programme, but it's not fast enough. And so, we constantly look to invest, look to maintain the estate. On pay, we've just had a really significant pay rise. It's not the last decade or so has been tough for everybody in the public sector, but the government recognised more than almost any other part of the public sector the contribution that the military makes, and this unique unlimited liability contract that we have. And I also don't think that people tend to join for the money, or indeed stay for money. It's the lifestyle, it's the sense of purpose, it's everything that goes with being in the military. So pay is important, but it's not absolutely vital. And it's more about having a sense of purpose and feeling valued. All of these messages matter. They do inform what we do, and I've got to balance the investments we take between paying people, between making sure that they've got the equipment so that when we put them on operations, they can fight effectively, having the infrastructure, and also making sure that we've got enough money to be able to train and operate. And that's just a constant juggling act.
When it comes to service family accommodation, though, how disappointed are you that there have been so many examples, and still are, of forces families living in mouldy houses, in not being able to get things repaired, in things dropping to bits, and just being so incredibly frustrated that nothing is changing? Yeah,
I mean, I share the frustration as well, and if I could pull a lever that would fix this overnight, then I'd have pulled it by now. So, I mean, the only thing I can reassure people is that the conversations that I and my fellow chiefs have with the Defence Infrastructure Organisation and also with the contractors that are responsible for this maintenance are pretty robust.
In 2023, why don't all female soldiers have kit that fits properly?
That's a great question. And it's something that we identified as a quick win measure a couple of years ago, and so we are beginning to roll out the sort of uniforms that that fit the female form better than a sort of standard shapeless thing that men wear, body armour, helmets, weight. So that is all in train. But no, I think it's a great challenge, and we can't move fast enough on it.
When will it be universal?
So I don't want to mislead by giving you a specific date, but I would expect in the next couple of years for that to be rolled out.
How do you think that makes personnel feel? It's 2023. Do you think in general, this is a really bad state of affairs and it should have been sorted much sooner?
I think we recognised that a couple of years ago, that finding equipment that fits all shapes and sizes for the military has got to be the right thing to do. But as I tell you, we're now moving out on it.
Let's talk about recruitment, but also culture in the military. What do you say to parents whose children would like to join, but then they see very distressing stories in the media about what some women have been through, just very negative stories, and they think, I don't want my child anywhere near that?
So what you described there is unacceptable. And I think we've been clear at every level that those sort of behaviours have no place in the British Army or any of the regiments or corps that are part of it. My predecessor, after we had the Sarah Atherton report, which was a really helpful illumination of some of the cultural issues and the behaviours that we've seen, launched a programme called Operation Teamwork, which I think is proving to be one of the most effective cultural change programmes that I've seen, and I visit a lot of armies and they look to ours as best practice. And the reason it's so effective is because rather than focusing on some of the ways of checking diversity and inclusion and behaviours, some people describe that pejoratively as box ticking, it focuses on what you need to be effective teams. And of course we all know that when we find ourselves deployed on operations or in training, the environment in a team is often closer than you will experience anywhere, and the dependence that people have on each other as team members is incredibly close. And in those conditions, people recognise that they have to be able to trust each other, that they have to be able to speak up, that they have to be themselves. So by linking the sort of cultures and behaviour that you would expect to operational outputs and to what our core purpose is, is a very good way of making people focus on how they behave when they're not on operations. We haven't got it universally right. There are still bad behaviours, and every time there are, we get after them. We're seeing, I think, much more openness in reporting those, which I'm encouraged by. But what you don't see is the extraordinary positive experience that most people have serving in the armed forces, the pride that men, women, people from all parts of society feel in wearing this uniform and making a contribution, and the extraordinary professionalism and commitment of some of the women that I serve with and have seen on operations around the world.
But you mentioned Sarah Atherton's report. She sent a letter within the last couple of months, concerned and worried about whistleblowers that had come forward and still talking about women going through horrendous things.
But Sarah Atherton also has, and she was Minister for Defence Personnel and Veterans, also thinks that what the Army has done, whether it's at Sandhurst or this whole programme, and getting after the recommendations in her report, has been exemplary.
How would you measure how the culture is in 2023 compared to 10 years ago then?
Almost unrecognisably different. So as I say, there are plenty of, there are still too many examples of people not behaving as you would want. And that's because we draw from society. These are not behaviours that are learned inside the Army, quite the opposite. From the very first day that people join training, whether it's at Harrogate or Catterick or anywhere else, they're given a really, really clear set of instructions around how they're expected to behave towards each other. So these are behaviours and values that we're importing from the rest of society, and it's how we then try to flush those out so that you build teams that we're getting after.
And in terms of diversity and representation, where are you at the moment, in your opinion, in the Army?
Not where we should be. So female representation in the regular Army is about 10-12%. Black, Asian and minority ethnic representation is around 15%. And I'm not interested in having more women or more ethnic groups in the Army for its own sake. I'm interested because there are parts of society where we're not tapping into the talent that we need, and also because, in my experience, teams that are more diverse tend to be better teams, and they make better decisions. So we've set ourselves some quite ambitious targets about growing female representation, about ethnic minority representation. We're seeing some progress against those, but are we where we want to be? No, of course not.
What's the silver bullet?
There's never a silver bullet. It's a fallacy to think that there's one thing that you can fix. But the pride that people take in being part of what is unquestionably one of the most professional armies in the world, with that extraordinary history of success behind it, the positive experience that people feel when they're on operations, as part of teams, the difference we make to people's lives and prospects, those are all good reasons to join the Army. You look at people who come to join us at Harrogate, 30% of them have been excluded from school. When they leave Harrogate, all of them will have a GCSE in English, and almost all of them will have a GCSE in maths. And you look at the faces of the parents and the families at those pass-out parades, the pride they take, the difference that we have made to their sons and daughters is extraordinary. So we change people's lives. We're an incredibly powerful tool of social mobility. We're the leading apprentice employer for the third year running in the UK. There's a lot to celebrate as well.
Let's talk about Ukraine. Soldiers are telling us how interested they are to actually see the kit they use being used in Ukraine. What's your assessment of seeing our kit on the battlefield?
So having advanced kit is important. I mean, if it wasn't, then we wouldn't seek it. But I think the key thing to remember, and this is a constant, is it's how you employ that kit. That's the most important. So I think we can take a lot of pride in the equipment that we've been given to the Ukrainians. So, for example, they can't get enough of the AS-90s, the artillery pieces that we've been providing them. The Javelin missiles that we provided in the early stages of the war were absolutely critical in holding back and stopping the Russian advances. And of course, we've now seen the first Challengers in action, and the Challenger is, in many respects, one of the most advanced tanks in the world, and it's certainly the best protected. And you saw that, when one of the first Challenger was lost in action, the crew all got out.
They did, but what went through your mind when you did see it destroyed?
Oh, an emotional tug, because I've probably been on that tank. We have a deep affection with the vehicles and the equipment that we've been fighting with over the last years. But I also recognise that that's what happens in war.
You've done an incredible amount in terms of training the Ukrainians. How have you adapted that over, since the beginning of the war, and what are you learning real time from how they're fighting it?
So we've, as you say, our training contribution has been the largest that there is. So we train about 30 to 40% of all of the Ukrainian soldiers who are conscripts, if you like, the volunteers who are joining. The rest are trained in Ukraine, and we do that with international partners. We've adapted the program, so we've extended the training period that they go through. We've changed and improved and invested in a lot of the facilities that they use in that training. We've changed the equipment that they train with to make it closer to what they're actually going to use on the battlefield. We obviously couldn't do that in the early stages. And we've listened to the Ukrainians themselves. So there's a constant dialogue between the commanders forward and what they want to see in the training. We know that it's incredibly effective because the Ukrainians tell us that their best trained troops are the ones that we train, and we know from intelligence intercepts of the Russians that they can tell when they're up against troops that have been trained in the UK. So it's been a really successful program. I think we need to begin to pivot our training now from sort of quantitative, so generating mass, to qualitative, and bringing it up a level so that we can begin to focus on training leaders. We can begin to develop or share our expertise in how you combine arms, the way you fight to get against enemy threats. And then, of course, the war has been a crucible for learning and adaptation. And perhaps the biggest lesson, there are, I could talk all day about the lessons that we draw from Ukraine and how we're building that into our own force design, how it's affected future soldier. But perhaps the two most important things are, first of all, the importance of morale and of will. It's very clear, the two armies that are fighting on that battlefield, which one has the most powerful sense of will and cohesion. And that, in warfare, will always see you through. And then the second is around adaptability. So, it's Darwinian. The species that adapts the fastest is the one that prevails and survives, not necessarily the strongest.
And how significant within that discussion is, the emergence truly of drone warfare and the amount of drones that are involved in this conflict? Hugely.
But we shouldn't get ourselves drawn into sort of techno-fetishism or assuming that changes in technology will change the nature of war itself. The battles with the drones are critically important, and we've invested $10.5 million just this year in making sure that when our troops train in places like Salisbury Plain, they've got swarms of drones over them so that they can adapt and also learn how to exploit them themselves. But equally, the numbers of casualties, the rates of advance, the number of armoured vehicles and tanks that are lost to drones actually hasn't changed significantly in this conflict compared to previous conflicts as well. So you won't win if you don't constantly adapt and you don't exploit these new techniques and procedures. That's why the adaptation matters so much. But the advantage is always quite slight because the enemy then responds, so it's a constant process of adaptation.
In terms of agility and speed as well, in your speech earlier this year, you famously said, when talking about Warriors and Challenger 2s and how long they've been in service, these are rotary dial telephones in an iPhone age. Can we reach the iPhone age, and by that point, will it be another age?
I mean, we are. We are. So at the moment, the Army is, I described to you earlier on this extraordinary post-process of transformation that we're going through. But we also need to be able to fight today, and that's why I launched Operation Mobilise, as soon as I took over as the CGS, because we've got to make sure that we're able to deter threats from Russia to our NATO allies, and particularly in Eastern Europe, and that will mean we're fighting with the equipment that we have now. But as we're doing that, we're also bringing in new technologies and new capabilities. So if I point you just to one, the Ajax will be, is proving to be the most advanced armoured fighting vehicle in the world. The capabilities that it has will make sure that we can be far more lethal, and we can also operate in a much more networked way on the battlefield. So that will be genuinely transformational. If you want to think of it, then think of it as a tracked version of the new model Apache. It is that advanced.
But it's been fraught with issues and problems. So I'm very curious, what word would best describe Ajax in your opinion? Given that it's been so associated with so many bad headlines.
Well, the headlines you're talking about at the procurement process. I'm not interested in the procurement process. I'd like to have had it in service faster and easier, but now that we're bringing it into service, the soldiers that are operating on it or trialling on it are completely blown away by the capabilities that it brings.
What about Morpheus? Huge delays there as well. How concerned are you that if it doesn't get implemented, and we still don't have a date, that adversaries will be able to hack into the existing system and hear everything that commanders are saying on the radios? So
you're mixing a number of things there. First of all, I don't want to talk about Morpheus because we're in commercial negotiations with GD, with General Dynamics, so I can't talk about it. What I will say is that the existing system that we have at the moment, which of course constantly gets refreshed and upgraded, is sufficiently secure and allows us to fight integrating data and in a combined arms way. So the existing systems are fit for purpose. What they don't do is allow us to accelerate into a digital age at the pace that I would want to.
And speaking of pace, the Defence Command Paper talks about a 5-year turnaround and 3-year turnaround for digital projects. How achievable is that, given what we've seen with the history of procurement in general?
Well, you're selling a fairly tired narrative around procurement failures. Let's point to the procurement successes. So when we gave the AS-90s to the Ukrainians, that left us with a gap in our inventory. Not having artillery is not a good thing. In the space of 2 months, we procured an artillery system from the Swedes, which is going to come into service this year. That is the fastest delivery of any procurement project that I can think of. So for every procurement failure, and you're right to point out that there have been some, there are also real procurement successes. 80 to 90% of the projects that Defence Equipment and Support run that are on contract come in either ahead of time or on time to specifications. So inevitably, there are always media focus on the procurement failures, but you need to balance it with some of the procurement successes that we've had as well. And Archer, the 6x6, would be one of those.
Are you leaving happy with the size of the Army?
Well, I'm leaving. So first of all, I'm not leaving. I've still got almost half of my tenure to do as the CGS, and I've been lucky enough to be a chief for almost 5 years now. I'll certainly, when I leave, leave happy because I've had an amazing career, and mostly because I got to spend it with some of the most amazing people that I could hope to have met. I just love being amongst soldiers, and it's every day I spend in this office, in this building, is a day wasted because I'm not spending it in the company of soldiers. But your question was, am I happy with the size of the Army? So the discussion around numbers is not the right discussion to have. The discussion to have is around what capabilities and what that Army can do. And against the mission sets that we have been given, particularly as part of NATO and the new force model, then we've got the structure and we've got the size to deliver that. There's no point in simply adding numbers to the army if you haven't got the ability to make them more lethal, more connected and better protected. So I have to balance numbers with capability, and I would rather make sure that the soldiers we have are able to operate and fight from advanced technical platforms than have under-equipped soldiers. Now, the army expands and contracts over time. It always has. And the British Army historically has never been a large army, except in general wartime. But you've got to have the structure that allows you to expand as well. And that's what, as we begin to restructure the army, that's what we're designing in.
But you've been quoted as describing cuts to the army as perverse, so that sounds as though you're very unhappy with the size of the army.
I don't think I need to repeat the answer I just gave you.
You have a new Defence Secretary, fresh out of the box. What have you been telling him?
He is an extremely experienced politician, and although he doesn't have a background in defence and security, he does have plenty of experience on the National Security Council. Many of his previous portfolios have given him an insight into security matters. But crucially, what we most need from a Secretary of State for Defence is political skill, authority and weight around the cabinet table, and the ability to have robust conversations with the Treasury. And Grant Shapps brings all of those things. He's clearly very engaged and interested in what the Army is doing. He values what the Army does enormously, and we had a conversation from around what the purpose of an Army is, what the Army design needs to be, what the Army should look like, and then the very exciting programme of modernisation and transformation that we've embarked on.
What do you want from him, and how long do you think it will be until he fully gets up to speed with the complexities of understanding the military and the differences between each of the services?
So we've been very lucky over the last 4 years to have a Secretary of State who's got previous military experience and is deeply passionate about the military, and we've benefited from all of Ben Wallace's experience and passion. But this is a department, this is a building full of experts. So what you need from a minister, a defence secretary, is political expertise. It's the ability to provide strategic and political direction. And in Grant Shapps, that's exactly what we've got.
You said you've got plenty more months left in the job. Why are you leaving?
Well, because my watch is ended. To quote a bit of Game of Thrones, I'm in my late 50s. I've done 40 years, close to, in uniform. This is my second job as a chief, as one of the chiefs, and I've been able, I hope I've been able in the time that I've been in this job, to begin that process of transformation of the Army. But you also have to make sure that you've got your successor queued up. You're handing over something that is a going concern, and sometimes that's the right time.
Was it your decision to leave, or would you have liked to have stayed in this post a little bit longer? Some of your predecessors have.
So I'm the longest serving chief. I've done more time as a chief than almost any of my predecessors.
But would you have liked to have extended it even further?
So this is a job that it's a privilege to be in, and I have loved every minute that I've been in this job. It's not always a picnic, but I've loved it mainly because it's an opportunity, and I've tried to add back to the soldiers I've had. So whatever time I'm given in this job is a privilege.
In terms of soldiers today, what would you tell them that you wish you could have told yourself at the beginning of your career?
Oh no, I think that's not where I'd start. So I was talking earlier on about why it is I stayed. One of the reasons I stayed is because I don't think in any other walk of life could I have spent 40 years rubbing soldiers with people from every single part of British society and every conceivable background, and rubbing soldiers with people, most of whom are below the age of 24 or 25. And youth has a vitality, an optimism, a sense of a lack of limits. And what I'd hate to do as an old fart is to begin to try to to stifle some of that enthusiasm. So feel free to make mistakes. The sort of boldness that youth brings is one of our greatest strengths.
What would you like to get done in your last few months?
So I'd like to make sure that the programme of modernisation and transformation that we've embarked on is completely locked in and built into all of the parties' manifestos, because I think the vision that we've got for the British Army is incredibly exciting. I think it's what the country needs, and making sure that secures cross-party support will be critical for me, and critical for the Army. And then I want to continue to make sure that we're delivering success on the battlefield in Ukraine.
And success in general across the military. You talked about the importance of people. Just briefly want to ask you about the interview that you gave, very candidly talking about mental health. What sort of reception did you get when you were very open and honest about what you've been through?
So, I mean, that was an interview that got far more publicity than I anticipated. I didn't think people would be very interested in what I had to say. Turns out that there was more interest than I was expecting. But all I was trying to do in that interview was, and it was done at a period of time where it's called time to talk. So it's a day each year where people do talk about their mental health. That's why I did it. And I wanted people to understand that, mental ill health affects everybody. It's no different to physical ill health. That there is absolutely no stigma associated with being honest about how you're feeling. And if you come into work and you're on an off day, whether it's because you've had a bad night's sleep, because you're not feeling physically fit, or because things are getting on top of you, then you should talk about it. Because the best cure for people feeling under the weather or depressed or low is to unload that burden and to share it with someone. And the thing about the Army is that people are so close. The bond that exists between soldiers who are under fire, who've gone through those deeply intense experiences together and have witnessed suffering as well, is close to love. I mean, often it is love. And so, what you think about yourself isn't necessarily what other people think of you. And so being able to, people want to help. And people always want to help. So you should feel free to talk about it. And I have, I have good days, and there are days where I feel really low as well. And the great thing is that I've got a team of people outside this office who I can talk to. I've got an Army Sergeant Major who's incredibly receptive, and he'll either give me a kick and a bollocking, or he'll give me some encouragement.
What is your message to anyone who is still, despite you, at your level giving the interview about it, who might still be a bit scared about being honest about how they're feeling?
That I recognise that people feel scared about it. It's okay to feel scared about it. There's no shame in not talking about it, but there's no shame in sharing either. And take the risk. Put your hand up, ask someone for help.
And just finally, you did talk about always having something on the horizon to look forward to. What are you looking forward to? And also, what's your plan when you do finish as CGS? What's on the ridgeline for you then?
So my ridgelines are more, my horizons at the moment are more limited than that. Every waking moment for me is about thinking about the Army, serving our soldiers and how we can make them better. What comes after that, I don't know, but it'll be exciting, because it's a change, and change is always exciting.
Thanks for watching. For more from Forces News, like and subscribe to our channel.